So I'm going to hold up for a minute and let's talk about Sammy again. Okay, so my model would say that in his early events that happened when he was going through, young, that the repeated over and over again of the abuse and the strong emotions that were part of that implicit part of his network makes it so it's difficult for him to change. And it's going to make it so that his, hippocampal, insightful awareness that Mr. K is a good guy even though he has a beard, and his emotional reaction that's so hard for him to manage, they are going to be out of synchrony for a while. And we help Sammy think about it. You're still going to be scared of him, but let's think about what we're going to do. And so his old networks from before will be slow to die. One of the things we can rely on is during that elementary school period, Sammy actually started working pretty well and got pretty competent, and he made some changes. And so we can build on that too, because those networks are still in there. Remember, Sammy, how you started doing this? Let's start doing that. We'll help you not get stuck with Mr. K by yourself and those kind of things. But we might start helping him so that, maybe we'll have lunch with Mr. K once a week, okay? And your mother can come up and she can be with you, or I'll sit down with you while you're with Mr. K, and he can sit there. You're still going to be sort of scared, all right? But if we sit down there and have lunch with Mr. K a few times, I think it may change for you, all right? And so not only are we going to help Sammy get used to the idea, okay, I'm going to be sort of scared for a while, which is hard for lots of kids to be willing to put up with, but we are also helping the teachers or the other people work with it. That little kid, he knows better than that. He knows Mr. K is a good guy. Instead, it's like, no, it's going to take this guy a while. And Mr. K is a good guy, so he's willing to sit down there with the kid even though the kid won't talk to him the first time. They just sit at the table. But that's slow progression, slowly habituating those negative kind of things. And then hopefully for Sammy, if we have a good relationship with Sammy and he's willing to try to think about stuff, is that he can have a sense of, okay, even though it's hard, maybe it can change. I trust this guy, he plays sorry with me and he never cheats, and so I trust him, and so I'll keep working on it. So that's an example of trying to use that awareness of implicit change being slow, even though it doesn't match the insight, it can still work. So now we're going to switch from looking at implicit and explicit memory to looking at emotion. Emotion is something that triggers memory. So here's one that's always great to share. It's one that I think I can share okay. But anyway, if we consider the emotion of embarrassment, okay, just to see how it's connected to memory, if you think about embarrassment, then think of all the different things that come into your mind when you think of when you were embarrassed in life. Just pause for a moment. You don't have to say any of them. They're all yours. But just think. So I can think of the teen club bus, and it was in Laredo, and it was in the evening, and I was next to Susan Fink was her name, and I was thinking, I might actually kiss her, and then somebody yells from the back of the bus, "Don't let your braces lock." She had braces, I had braces. Guess what? I never kissed Susan Fink. I never even talked to her again. And guess what? But then once I get there, I can jump to several other mortifying experiences I have had in my life that I'm not going to share with you. But emotion takes me there. Emotion brings the memories back up. And so that's one of the things to notice is that affect is an integral part of memory. Okay, it's focused on the amygdala, which is down in here. It's somewhat close to the hippocampus, and they end up interacting. But the amygdala is this particularly strong emotion reaction center, and it has close interactions with the hippocampus. And one of the ways Ledoux talks about it is the hippocampus integrates things. The amygdala and its connections through implicit kind of memory is connected to lots of events and experiences, and the hippocampus then sort of pulls that together for us. We know that the sensory input to the amygdala can bypass the cortex. Remember Ledoux rats, so they could learn to be afraid, and even though they didn't know why they were afraid. And those same kind of things can study for us because of those direct connections. One of the things that happens with thinking of repression or unconscious kind of material is stuff can get recorded implicitly, and then, but not be aware. The person cannot even be aware of it when it happens, and it starts to give this idea that maybe it's repressed because it was never recorded, rather than because it was then rejected later. The emotional state affects our perceptions. If I'm feeling scared and then I'm walking down a dark alley and I see a shadow move, I almost see a man, okay? And so my fear has shifted what my perception is. And so that's something that we're aware of, that the emotion does in our memory and our connections. And then affect can influence actions directly. I was so angry, I acted without thinking. Okay, I wish I hadn't said that, but my emotions made me do it. And so our emotions rule, and the front of our head is not always in a position where it does a good job of stopping it. And so those are different elements of affect that are part of just the way our system runs. And so that's to be thinking about. Now there's a certain interaction between stress, emotion, and memory, and stress, emotion, and the hippocampus that's important to think about, especially if you end up working with folks who've been traumatized in one way or another. Stress triggers a cascade of noradrenaline release. And noradrenaline in small to moderate amounts increases your amygdala activity, and it also increases your hippocampal activity. So so when you have a memory that was like, that was a really scary time, guess what? I remember it crystal clear in my head what that scary time was like. It wasn't traumatizing, it was just scary. But then if adrenaline levels get really high, sexual trauma, sexual abuse, physical abuse, traumatic events in war, all those kind of things, the levels of adrenaline are so high, it actually starts to shut down the hippocampus. Okay, so then if a person's remembering that event in war where 3 guys got blown apart right in front of them, but I can't remember it. It's a blank space in my head. Okay, but periodically his wife will find him breaking down, saying, no, don't do that, run. So he's gone, he's having a flashback, he's wrapped up in the memory. Clearly the memory is stored in there, okay, but when you sit down to talk to him, it's not hippocampally available. Now Freud might say, he's repressed it because he doesn't want to look at it, okay, but what this model would say is a different way that stuff can be gotten out of the way is it was never recorded. It was too much. It wasn't recorded in that aware kind of way. It was instead recorded in implicit memory and just comes back in flashbacks in ways that the front of your head is not aware of it. Okay, so it's a very disconnected kind of thing. One of the things that we know about the implicit memory is it operates from the beginning. The kid's learning to walk. He's using implicit memory systems. When is your earliest memory in your life that you can consciously remember? Think about what age that is. Typically around 3 or 4, okay? Prior to that, the explicit memory system that includes frontal and hippocampal kind of wiring is not in place. So people typically can't remember consciously what's been happening up to that point. Do you think emotional things were registered in that kid's life from 0 to 3 or 0 to 4? Oh, heck yes, okay? And if it was a good memory, that's really fine. And if it was not a good memory, then that's going to be in there. And it's going to come up when similar kind of relationships are present, and that it's going to be difficult to manage those. And they're going to feel crazy when that stuff happens. I can't remember anything that would lead to that. But so that we want to be aware that those kind of things can happen. These days they talk about mindfulness, okay? And I've talked some, I've alluded to, like working with a borderline, I might try to move their focusing up to the front of their head or move their focusing back down to the emotions that they're experiencing, depending on what's going on for them. This one's not in yours, I don't think. I think it's something I added. Sorry, all that rustling paper. But thinking reduces the intensity of feelings. It tends to be there. If you start labeling it, it reduces the emotion that happens. That's part of the core of the mindfulness kind of approach. And then part of it is I'm going to choose what I'm trying to do. Again, when I say I'm going to move the person up to the front of their head or move them back down to the bottom, one is when I've gotten pretty familiar with a person, I have a sense of how much I can help that shift or not. I certainly in my practice don't feel like, oh yeah, well let's just move them up here and that works fine, and then we'll move them down here. Guess what? It's not working like that. It's like I'm going, oh my God, they're going to go out there and what's going to happen? Let's start working on that because I think it's pretty important to do. It's much more of a struggle to do than I might sound like, and we're working to choose the emotional intensity that we're working on. So we've been just to flash it up here in our big picture, the emotion is what we're working on, and we're talking about how emotion could affect motor. I was so angry I couldn't think straight. I was so angry when I was sitting in class I couldn't listen to the teacher. I couldn't focus attention. So if we started thinking about Sammy again and we consider the emotion system, as a low definition memory system, when he was traumatized by his uncle, there's a good likelihood he wouldn't even remember the similarity consciously between his Uncle Bill and Mr. K, and he wouldn't be necessarily remembering consciously, what had happened to him. And so as we work with him, we start to make connections, but he's not bad and ridiculous because he has that connection, but instead it's something that makes sense because his two memory systems, with the strong emotion, he probably doesn't even have the emotion in his explicit memory. If we can help people around him accept that and acknowledge that, then he won't feel as crazy and they won't see him as crazy. And so we help Sammy work through that. And then we can help him be aware of the feelings that he has. He can be aware that when rage comes up out of the blue, when he's thinking about Mr. K, he can be going, oh yeah, I know I'm mad at my Uncle Bill. Let me work on it. If we have a good relationship, we can help him do that. So we go from emotion to anxiety. And up here I have them listed separately. Emotion is, anger, fear, rage, those kind of things seeming to be housed in the hippocampus. Anxiety, having some screening kind of centers that Gray and his research would say is actually in the hippocampus. So it's like different information is coming into the hippocampus, and when things are lining up, that this is just like when I got hit by my dad, or this place is similar to the place where I was attacked, on my way home from work that day, then as I get into that situation, the anxiety alarms start to go off. And so then that can be directly associated with if I was in a car wreck and it devastated my family, then when I go even get ready to sit in a car, I start to have a panic, okay? Well, how are we going to work them through it? We got to go help them sit there and then slowly get more and more active in their driving. But the anxiety is a warning of what's going to happen. If someone has a fear of failure when they go sit down to take a test, their anxiety starts to take over and starts to overwhelm them. There are ways to then intervene. We can help them shift from focusing on outcome to shift to focusing on content of the material, because content doesn't have the affect. The affect is in your thoughts about outcome and what's going to happen. And we can also help them do breathing and those kind of things that affect the motor system and the arousals, and then also the arousals, using motor breathing to help manage the arousal system. And then we can also help them then refocus on content, on networks that don't have the emotion connected to it. Okay, so anxiety is special because it includes a whole stress response. It's not just, oh, I feel anxious and it's connected to this, but if I get good and anxious, my experience in my own head is my head goes gray. It's like I can't think if I get really anxious, all right? And so what happens is there's a chemical flood, and all of a sudden they've done a research with worriers where when you're a worrier, it's like your whole brain is turned on at once. They gave them math tasks to do. Well, everybody's math tasks turned on this part of the brain. I think it was left parietal. But with the worriers, all the rest of the brain was turned on too. With the non-worriers, the rest of the brain was quiet. All right, so it's like trying to focus on your math while there's a lot of noise and interference and other people talking that distracts you from your math, and it makes it harder to think. A thing I'll do with kids is, okay, I think you're sort of nervous and anxious. Okay, so if you start to do your math problem, every time you do a step in your math problem, tell yourself you're stupid. Okay, so they start to do the math and how I'm stupid. And then they start to do the next step, but now I'm stupid. And then I start to do the next step, and now I'm stupid. Well, what just happened to how well they could do? Just thinking about that stuff interferes with what they're being able to do. So you've got this chemical flood. It's two different networks that get going, the judgment, I'm stupid network, and the do the math kind of network. But it takes the whole response. And then, anxiety is there for a reason. It's a good thing to have. It warns us when we're getting next to bad stuff. And Freud had it, when you get anxious and nervous, you do behaviors to get away from the anxiety and the nervousness. You don't even have to think about the fact that this guy's just like the dad that hit you. Your anxiety gets you away and protects you. And so anxiety shields the person, from the actual memory of what happened. When information comes in, back to the same rat experiment as before, when it comes in, anxiety will turn on 4 times faster than your ability to know what got you anxious. And so you were anxious before you knew where it came from. And that, I just got anxious out of the blue. Okay, well, that's because it runs faster than your ability to know what's triggering your anxiety.
Doctor?
Yeah.
With that, the performance anxiety kind of comes to mind if people are having performance anxiety-related presentations that or tests, exams. They may have studied all night long, they know that content, but they can't access that content because the anxiety is obviously quicker and it sounds like also much stronger.
Yeah.
So how do you help someone process that when they're in that moment to reach that content?
Well, and so then when I'm trying to do an intervention with that, the first thing I do, I will teach them relaxation skills to see if they can calm down their head better, okay? But then what I get them to work on is thought substitution, which is switching networks, okay? And so your network of, when you start to go in to take the test, you're thinking, I'm going to screw up again. Well, as soon as you're thinking those networks, you are no longer thinking about history or calculus or whatever it is, you're thinking about failure. And there's very little math in your failure network. Okay, and so what I get them to do is just be really clear that one network has information in it and one network doesn't have information in it. And then I will train them, let's think of all the ways you can get to your information network. And remember, it's a network. You can get the image. What's the image that you have of reading it in the book? Can you see it on the page? What is the, can you remember hearing your teacher talk about it? All right, that's a different way of, can you remember writing out the problem or writing out the answers on your review sheet? Okay, that's a motor kind of recall of what was going on. And then start just going through the questions on the test one at a time. Guess what? Because it's a test, it's a node, like in your networks, that connect the outcome kind of thinking with the content kind of thinking. And you will slip back into, oh my God, but what if I fail? And then it's just like, breathe again, just start refocusing on the content. Well, you're going to think it's not working because now it's the second time or the third time I've started thinking about failing again. Oh yeah, but that's what Dr. Folensbee said. You just keep, doesn't matter how many times you do it, just every time it happens, refocus on the network, keep working to activate the network that is more useful, and we'll just see where we go. So that's a strategy that I would use in that kind of situation.